Welcome to Life Stories, where we share real-life experiences that teach us profound lessons about love, boundaries, and personal growth. Today's story is about a woman who opened her home to help her stepsister and her family, only to face unexpected consequences. What started as a generous gesture turned into a battle for her peace, her career, and her sanity. Join us as we explore how setting boundaries and standing up for yourself can change your life for the better. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to start today's story. I had always prided myself on the space I had created for myself. At 29, I had built my life on my terms. With my career as a freelance graphic designer, my apartment, a 2-bedroom in a quiet part of town, was everything I had dreamed of, a peaceful sanctuary where I could work, think, and create. Every inch of that apartment had been carefully curated to suit my needs. A desk by the window for natural light, a perfectly organized kitchen, and a cozy living room where I could unwind. I loved the solitude it offered, the stillness that allowed me to meet deadlines and concentrate on my clients. But everything changed the day Amanda showed up at my door. I had never expected it. "Emma, we've lost everything," she said, her voice cracking. Behind her, Ben stood quietly, his eyes filled with unspoken worries. Their 2 children, Lily and Jake, clung to Amanda's legs, the 4-year-old's tears streaking down her face, and the 6-year-old looking like he didn't quite understand the gravity of what was happening. I could feel the tension in the air, their desperate need for help. "We're not asking for much. Just a place to stay until we get back on our feet," Amanda continued, her voice trembling as she wiped her tears. "You're our only hope, Emma." I stared at her. My stepsister, the person who had always taken more than she gave. I remembered all too well the way she had taken over everything when we were younger. But now, I couldn't ignore the pleading look in her eyes. They were family, and family needed help. I could see the fear in her face as she spoke about her children being homeless. I felt my heart soften despite everything. "Okay," I said, the word leaving my lips before I could stop it. "But just for a few months. Just until you get back on your feet." Amanda's face lit up with relief, and I could see Ben sigh in gratitude. But deep down, a part of me knew I had just made a decision I would come to regret. Still, the thought of her children suffering haunted me. It was the right thing to do, wasn't it? 2 days later, the chaos began. I had imagined they would settle in quietly, respecting the boundaries of my carefully arranged life. But from the moment they moved in, it became clear that nothing was going to be temporary about this arrangement. The first morning, I awoke to the sound of shouting and laughter. Lily and Jake were running through the living room, their voices echoing off the walls, shattering the peace I had worked so hard to preserve. I stood frozen in the doorway of my bedroom, watching as Amanda and Ben settled into my space like it was their own. Ben sprawled across my couch, asking about the Wi-Fi password, flipping through TV channels with a lack of concern for the space he was invading. And Amanda? She was already reorganizing my kitchen, moving my carefully placed mugs and dishes. "It's just so inefficient," she said, rearranging my cabinets as if she had lived there for years. I wanted to protest, to tell her that this was my home and my workspace. I needed that kitchen to remain functional, my office to stay organized. But instead, I held my tongue. I had offered them a place to stay. After all, they were family, and I couldn't let them down. I reminded Amanda, gently, that I worked from home and needed my office to stay as it was. She waved it off dismissively. Oh, it didn't take long for the constant interruptions to take their toll. My once quiet home, my serene sanctuary, was now filled with the sounds of children running through every room, their toys strewn across the floor. The tranquility I had worked so hard to build was shattered. My workspace, the one place where I could focus, was now just another playground. My carefully organized drafting table had become a repository for coloring books, crayons, and unfinished drawings. I had spent years perfecting that space, my office where I could concentrate, my personal corner of the world where creativity flowed. But now, it felt like it belonged to everyone but me. Every morning, I woke up to the sight of a kitchen in complete disarray. The counters were sticky, dishes piled high in the sink, food left out for hours. Amanda claimed she was too exhausted to clean up after cooking for her family. And Ben? He spent his days lounging on my couch, scrolling through his phone and asking about the Wi-Fi password. Without even a hint of guilt. They never helped with chores, never contributed to the household expenses. Yet their demands seemed endless. It became harder and harder to ignore the growing frustration that welled up inside me. I was losing the battle for my space, my work, and my peace of mind. One afternoon, I found my art supplies, my precious, organized art supplies, moved again. They had been tidied away, shoved into a corner where I couldn't find anything. When I confronted Amanda, she brushed me off with an excuse. The kids need a place to do their homework. She didn't even seem to see the problem. In her eyes, it was all just part of being a family, sharing space. But it wasn't sharing, it was taking. You can work in your bedroom, right? She asked casually when I mentioned my need for a quiet, organized space. I could feel my blood pressure rising. This wasn't just about the office. It was about respect, about boundaries that had been crossed. Over and over, I tried to hold my ground. But Amanda's response was always the same: you're just not used to having people around. This is how normal families live. I wanted to scream. This wasn't normal, this wasn't healthy. I had given them a place to stay. But they had turned it into something unrecognizable. The breaking point came one Tuesday afternoon. I had gone to a coffee shop to meet an important deadline for a client. Desperate for some peace and quiet to get work done. When I returned home 3 hours later, I was hit with a wave of disbelief. My drafting table, my workspace, had been moved without my permission. It was shoved into the apartment's storage unit. Its place in my living room replaced by a giant toy organization system. Bright plastic bins filled with toys now dominated the space where I had built my career. Surprise! Amanda beamed, standing proudly in the middle of the room, her hands on her hips. Now the kids have a proper play area. Much better use of the space. Right? I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind racing. Where's my drafting table? I asked, my voice shaky with a mix of anger and disbelief. Oh, we put that old thing in storage. You never really used it anyway. You're always working on your laptop these days, she said dismissively, like it was nothing. I felt a surge of frustration and anger. This was my office, my space, my livelihood. How dare she move things around without even asking? But I had been too passive, too accommodating. For too long, the line between kindness and self-sacrifice had blurred. And now my professional life, my passion, was at risk. You can't expect the kids to be cooped up in one room all day. Amanda continued, a familiar defensiveness creeping into her tone. They need space to play. And I'm a working professional who needs her office. I shot back, my voice sharper than I had ever heard it. This apartment isn't a daycare center, it's my workplace. But Amanda wasn't done. She stood there, looking at me with that wounded expression she always wore when she wanted to make me feel guilty. You're being selfish, she said, her voice dripping with melodrama. Selfish? I could feel the tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. What exactly have you done except take over my home? You haven't even looked for a job. Amanda, you haven't tried to find a new place. And you haven't contributed a dime to the household. The words were out before I could stop them. You've just taken, and taken, and taken. At that, Lily began to cry, her sobs filling the room. Amanda scooped her up, giving me a look that said everything without words. See what you've done? Come on, sweetie, Amanda whispered, carrying Lily away. Let's go. Let's get away from Aunt Emma who doesn't want to share her toys. And just like that, they retreated, leaving me standing in the middle of my living room, my heart racing, my mind whirling. I realized then what I had known all along but refused to admit. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't helping family. This was enabling entitlement. This was a full-scale invasion of my life. And I was letting it happen. I knew I had to make a change. But how? How could I ask them to leave after everything? How could I take back control of my space, my life, without destroying the fragile family ties we had left? The answer wasn't clear, but deep down, I knew that if I didn't act soon, I would lose myself entirely. That night, after they had all gone to bed, I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the screen of my laptop. The weight of my frustration, my helplessness, hung over me. I had given so much already, too much, and still, it wasn't enough. I had tried to be understanding, tried to make this arrangement work. But my life, my career, my peace of mind, it was all slipping away. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of actually following through terrified me. I had to leave. I could feel the resolve growing inside me, a quiet determination that was stronger than any guilt or hesitation. It wasn't about abandoning them, it was about saving myself. I had spent months being the caretaker, the enabler, the one who sacrificed her own needs for the sake of family. But in the process, I had lost sight of who I was. I had lost my boundaries, my space, my peace. So, I began to plan. The next day, I started researching apartments across town. I needed something that was far enough away to ensure there would be no temptation to return. No reason to fall back into the same toxic dynamic. I found a one-bedroom apartment with a small office nook, just the right amount of space for me and my work. I paid the deposit from my emergency savings, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. This was going to be my new beginning. But it wasn't just about finding a new place to live. It was about reclaiming my life, my space, and my independence. Slowly, I began to move my most important belongings into a storage unit. My expensive drawing tablet, my backup drives, my portfolio materials, anything I couldn't risk Amanda rearranging or tidying up, was carefully packed away. I documented everything, taking photos of the mess they had made. The way my office had been overtaken by toys and clutter. I saved screenshots of the ignored text messages where I asked about their plans, their job search, their efforts to find a new place. It was all part of my plan to protect myself, to ensure that if I had to take action, I would have the evidence I needed. I even started documenting the little things, the ignored expenses, the grocery bills they never offered to pay. I kept a list of the outrageous demands they had made, the way they had taken advantage of my kindness without ever offering anything in return. The frustration I felt every time Amanda casually mentioned that they hadn't looked at any apartments because they were too comfortable in my place. Each comment added fuel to the fire. Once my plan was in motion, I made one final step. I contacted my landlord. They're not on the lease, I explained, the words coming easily now. They're unauthorized occupants. I'd like them removed when I leave. The landlord was understanding and agreed to help, reminding me that I wasn't obligated to renew my lease if I chose not to. It was a delicate balance, I thought, being kind, but firm. I couldn't just leave without notice. I couldn't be cruel, so I arranged for the utilities to be disconnected a few days after my departure. They wouldn't be left without power or water. But soon enough, they would have no choice but to take action. The hardest part wasn't planning, though. It wasn't even executing the plan. It was maintaining a normal routine while I prepared. I had to endure Amanda's daily reorganizing of my belongings, her insistent excuses about why they hadn't found jobs or apartments, her manipulative remarks about the stress of their situation. And still, I smiled, I nodded, I played the role of the good sister, the understanding one. Then came the final straw. One evening, Amanda casually mentioned how grateful she was for everything I had done for them. "We really appreciate everything you've done, Emma," she said, sprawled out on my couch with shopping bags at her feet. "You're such a good sister. Letting us stay until we find the perfect place." Something inside me snapped. I stood up, my hands shaking slightly. "When will that be?" I asked, my voice steady, but my heart pounding. "How much longer are we going to pretend this is temporary?" Amanda shrugged, unfazed. "You know how it is," she said, with a smile that barely touched her eyes. "These things take time. We can't just settle for any apartment. We have the kids to think about, I clenched my fists. I had heard these excuses before. The same ones they had used when they first moved in. You mean you don't want to leave? I said softly. You've gotten comfortable here, haven't you? Amanda's face darkened for a moment. But she quickly recovered. You're being dramatic, she replied. We're family. Don't forget that. But I had forgotten that family didn't mean giving up your life, your space, and your happiness for someone else. And now, I was finally ready to take it back. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I wasn't going to wait any longer. It was time to go. The next morning, I moved out. In the days following my departure, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in months. Moving into my new apartment felt like stepping into a world where I was free to breathe again. My office was restored to its rightful place. Organized, and calm, the way it had been before they had taken over. For the first time in a long while, I could work without constant interruptions, without the weight of guilt hanging over me. It wasn't just about the space, it was about reclaiming my life. My business quickly picked up again. Without the constant disruptions, I could focus on my clients, meet deadlines, and grow in ways I hadn't been able to in months. My reputation as a designer was restored, and my work flourished. Meanwhile, Jessica and Ben's world began to unravel. Despite their attempts to spin the story, family members slowly started to see through their excuses. They were not the victims they portrayed themselves to be. They had manipulated everyone into thinking they were the ones in need. But it was clear now that their actions had consequences. A year later, Jessica reached out again, attempting to repair the bridge she had burned. But I had learned my lesson. My life was no longer about sacrificing for others at the expense of my own well-being. I had found strength in setting boundaries, in saying no to toxic relationships, and in focusing on my own happiness. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for family is not to fix their problems, but to let them face the consequences of their actions. That was the lesson I took with me, one I would carry forward, no matter how hard the road ahead might seem. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring life stories.